Human knowledge has always been incredibly fragile. For over 2,000 years, ancient civilizations engineered libraries to be fortresses against time, using architectural genius to protect our collective wisdom from fire, decay, and oblivion. By the end of this journey, you will understand the 26 specific design principles that allowed ideas to survive for millennia. How did a simple choice of building materials save entire genres of literature from being eaten away? What was the secret system that allowed a destroyed library's contents to live on elsewhere? The strategies developed in halls of stone and papyrus are now the bedrock of how we preserve our digital world today. What single piece of our modern knowledge would you most want to save for the next 2,000 years? The Great Library of Alexandria was never meant to be an island. It was the vibrant heart of the Museum, a sprawling academic city within a city, deliberately anchored in the world's busiest port. Every ship that docked in that harbor carried more than cargo. It carried the possibility of a new idea. Librarians would meet traders on the bustling wharves, scanning their manifests not for spices or silks, but for scrolls. This was a system designed to transform global commerce into an endless river of knowledge, ensuring the library's collections grew with every tide. But this prime location was about more than just acquisition. It was the first layer of defense. The library's foundations were set on stable, elevated ground, a calculated move to distance its priceless contents from the constant threats of floodwaters and the insidious dampness that could rise from the earth. This careful siting was a silent, brilliant strategy. It minimized risks from earthquakes and the pervasive Mediterranean humidity, with deep foundations acting as an unseen shield. The very ground it stood on was the unsung hero, a choice that made the library both a beacon for scholars and a fortress for words, and upon that resilient ground, they would erect walls using materials chosen with the same foresight. But the ground itself was only the first defense. The true shield was built from the materials chosen with astonishing foresight. While Alexandria's librarians scoured the docks for papyrus scrolls, a rival power was rising in the city of Pergamum. Their own library was growing so rapidly that the Ptolemies in Alexandria, in a move of pure intellectual rivalry, allegedly embargoed the export of papyrus to them. This act of scholarly warfare forced Pergamum to innovate. They perfected the treatment of animal skins, creating a durable, flexible writing surface we now know as parchment, or pergamena. This was not a mere substitute, it was an upgrade, a material far more resistant to tearing, moisture, and the simple brittleness of age than fragile papyrus. This rivalry sparked a materials revolution that would echo for centuries. The buildings themselves were constructed from stone, marble, and fired clay bricks. These were not just aesthetic choices, they were calculated decisions for survival. Stone does not burn. It resists pests and stands firm against the slow, grinding erosion of time. Inside these formidable structures, the protection became even more sophisticated. Shelves and storage cabinets were crafted from cedar wood. The beautiful grain and rich color were secondary to the wood's secret weapon, aromatic oils that naturally repelled insects, creating a toxic environment for the dreaded bookworms that could reduce a scroll to dust. Even the walls themselves were active participants in preservation. Specific mortars and plasters were formulated to absorb excess moisture from the air, acting like a giant, passive dehumidifier. This careful regulation of internal humidity was a silent battle against the mold and rot that could destroy organic texts in a single, damp season. every material, from the massive stone blocks to the cedar shelves and the smart plaster on the walls, worked in concert. They created a stable micro-environment where knowledge was not just stored, but could literally endure for ages. This mastery of material science set the stage for an even more incredible achievement: the deliberate engineering of the library's very atmosphere. But the silent guardianship of stone and cedar was only half the battle. The air itself had to be tamed. Within the Scriptorium, a scholar would find the atmosphere remarkably constant, a cool and dry refuge from the sweltering heat or coastal dampness outside. This was no accident. It was environmental engineering on a grand scale, achieved centuries before the invention of mechanical systems. The thick stone walls did more than just stand strong against invaders or storms. They served as a massive thermal battery. Their immense weight and density allowed them to slowly absorb the sun's heat throughout the day, preventing the interior from warming too much. Then, as night fell and the air cooled, these walls would gently release that stored warmth, smoothing out the daily temperature swings that cause materials to expand and contract, stressing and cracking fragile scrolls over time. This temperature regulation worked in perfect harmony with a cleverly designed ventilation strategy. Architects were masters of airflow, positioning windows and air shafts not just for light, but to create deliberate cross-currents. These channels would draw moist, stagnant air out and replace it with drier air, actively battling the humidity that could make parchment warp or encourage mold to bloom on papyrus. In some regions, the solution was even more profound. Libraries built in arid climates often extended their protection deep underground into semi-subterranean galleries known as a cryptoporticus. Here, they leveraged the Earth's own perfect insulation. The deep ground maintains a stable, cool temperature year-round, creating a natural vault where the climate was always ideal for preservation. This entire system of passive climate control was a continuous, unseen effort, a daily fight against the inevitable decay that threatened every single scroll. It reveals an ancient, intuitive grasp of environmental science that was perfectly integrated with the next challenge: how to organize the sheer mountain of knowledge these structures were built to hold. This logical flow from the grand architecture of air and stone leads to a more intimate scale of genius, the organization of knowledge itself. The magnificent library of Celsus in Ephesus stands as a perfect example, its breathtaking marble facade hiding a secret. It was a giant, three-dimensional filing cabinet. Behind the statues and columns lay a wall honeycombed with niches and recessed shelves, each one a designated home for a specific set of scrolls. This was not just storage, it was architecture as a cataloging system. The typical library blueprint placed a central hall for reading and consultation, surrounded by smaller chambers or specialized cupboards known as armaria. Each of these units was dedicated to a particular subject, author, or literary genre, transforming the entire building into a physical map of human understanding. A scholar would not wander aimlessly through a chaotic maze. They would follow a deliberate path through geography, then poetry, then philosophy, with the very walls guiding their search. This revolutionary spatial order was made possible by foundational work like the Pinax, the first known library catalogue, created by the scholar Callimachus in Alexandria. His system of organizing scrolls by subject and author gave librarians the blueprint to arrange their physical world. The profound benefit of this architectural order was preservation through efficiency. By knowing exactly where a scroll resided, a librarian could retrieve it directly, minimizing the unnecessary handling, unrolling, and searching that would inevitably lead to wear, tears, and damage. The architecture itself enforced a protective discipline, Rare or exceptionally fragile texts could be placed in more secure, less trafficked areas, perhaps in a separate, climate-controlled room or on a higher shelf, safe from casual contact. This masterstroke of information management, turning a building into a logical, navigable system, set the stage for the next brilliant innovation, the protective armor created for each individual scroll. This meticulous architecture of knowledge required an equally sophisticated system for protecting each individual scroll. Within the cool, cedar-scented air of the library, a fragile papyrus roll was never left exposed. After being carefully rolled with the text facing inward, it was given its own protective shell, a cylindrical case known as a capsa. Crafted from leather or wood, this simple tube was a shield against dust, pests, and the crushing weight of its neighbors on the shelf. Attached to this container was a small but revolutionary tag called a syllabus. This tiny label, often hanging from a cord, identified the scroll's author and title, creating the first search engine. A librarian or scholar could scan a shelf full of identical capsae and know exactly what was inside without ever risking the damage of unrolling the text itself. The way these containers were stored was another act of deliberate preservation. They were laid horizontally on the deep shelves, a critical detail that prevented the scrolls from unrolling under their own weight over time. Storing them flat also avoided putting constant pressure on the delicate inner layers of papyrus or parchment, preventing cracks and creases that would eventually cause the material to fragment. This philosophy of gentle handling extended to the very act of reading. Specialized reading tables and desks were designed with gentle slopes and smooth rollers. When a scholar finally unrolled a text for study, it would be supported along its entire length, its fragile surface never sagging or touching the table below. This minimized physical stress and, just as importantly, reduced contact with the natural oils from human hands, which could slowly degrade the writing surface over decades of use. This attention to the micro level of handling, from the individual capsa to the engineered reading desk, was not merely about efficiency. It was a form of reverence, a daily practice that extended the lifespan of each text by decades, even centuries. Every action, from the librarian placing a capsa on a shelf to the scholar carefully turning a roller, was part of a sacred ritual dedicated to the survival of an idea. This deeply ingrained culture of care was supported by the most vital component of the entire system, the human beings who dedicated their lives to this endless, meticulous work. These librarian scholars were the library's beating heart. A figure like Eratosthenes was not a simple custodian. He was the director of the entire museum, a geographer who calculated the Earth's circumference with stunning accuracy, and a mathematician who devised a method for finding prime numbers. This fusion of roles was critical. An expert curator could not only identify a rare text on a ship's manifest, they could immediately understand its significance for the entire collection. Their work of acquisition was a form of high-stakes diplomacy and intellectual espionage. They negotiated with merchants, paid vast sums for rare works, and legend tells they even held incoming scrolls for ransom, insisting the originals be copied for the library before being returned to their owners. Every new acquisition then faced its next trial, authentication. A scholar-librarian would scrutinize the text for anachronisms, stylistic inconsistencies, or logical errors that might indicate a forgery or a corrupted copy. Only after this vetting would the text be passed to a team of professional scribes for duplication. This copying was not a mechanical act, it was an art form. Scribes worked with extreme precision, replicating every character and annotation, their goal being a perfect, indistinguishable duplicate. Their deep personal investment in the content drove them to innovate. A mathematician preserving a geometry text would demand flawless diagrams. A poet would ensure the meter and line breaks were perfectly reproduced. This scholarly rigor was the first and most vital line of defense against the slow decay of meaning, the creeping errors that could turn a profound truth into nonsense over generations of recopying. This human intellect was the most dynamic and adaptive component of the entire system, a living, breathing preservation technology. Their collective work gave the library its cultural gravity, transforming it from a mere storehouse into a monument of such immense political and symbolic power that its very existence commanded protection. The library's true power was not in its silent scrolls, but in the constant, vibrant hum of human intellect that filled its halls. This was the genius of its integration with the museum, a complete academic city where the world's finest thinkers lived, worked, and debated mere steps from the shelves. The library was not a quiet tomb for books. It was the central engine of a living, breathing community of scholars, poets, and scientists. This created a self-sustaining ecosystem where the act of preservation was inseparable from the act of creation. A philosopher would pull a scroll on ethics, use it to formulate a new argument in a heated debate, and then his own written refutation would be copied and added to the collection. A geographer would consult a dozen maps and travelogues to chart a new coast, and his resulting treatise would join the very sources that inspired it. This constant, dynamic use of the texts was the ultimate justification for the library's existence and its lavish funding. The scrolls were not simply being stored, they were being tested, criticized, and expanded upon every single day. Their value was perpetually being demonstrated and renewed. This synergy transformed the library from a passive warehouse into a dynamic workshop for the human mind, a place where knowledge was not a static artifact but a living, growing entity. The presence of this resident intellectual community created an unbreakable feedback loop. The scholars needed the library to fuel their work, and their groundbreaking work, in turn, made the library more indispensable, attracting more patronage, more brilliant minds, and even more texts. This model cemented the institution's vital role in society, a role that was ultimately secured by the powerful, visionary patrons who understood that funding such a place was an investment in eternity itself. This political shield was physically manifested in the very stones of the library. The same patrons who funded the acquisition of scrolls also financed formidable defensive architecture, often choosing elevated sites within palace complexes or the heart of a city. The Library of Celsus, for instance, was not just a repository. Its facade was a monumental statement of imperial power and civic pride, a declaration that this knowledge was under the permanent protection of Rome itself. The massive, fire-resistant stone walls and strategically limited entrances were as much about deterring attack and controlling access as they were about climate control. This architectural statement served a dual purpose. It physically safeguarded the contents while broadcasting a clear warning that an assault on the library was an assault on the state. This high-level patronage created a powerful feedback loop. The prestige of housing the world's knowledge brought glory to the ruler, and that glory, in turn, demanded the library's continued existence. The institution became too big to fail, a symbol so potent that its destruction would be a profound political and cultural catastrophe. Yet this reliance on powerful individuals was also the system's greatest vulnerability. A change in regime, a shift in imperial priorities, or a simple financial downturn could withdraw that essential protection in an instant. The very walls designed to withstand fire and siege could not defend against the slow decay of political will. This inherent fragility raises a haunting question. How could you build a library so resilient that it could survive even the collapse of the civilization that created it? The answer lay not in a single mighty fortress, but in a network of copies scattered to the winds. These architectural defenses transformed knowledge into a literal fortress. Visualize the great library of Pergamum perched high on its Acropolis. This was not merely for a grand view, it was a deliberate military choice. A fortified hilltop offered a commanding defensive position, forcing any potential invader or rioter to fight an uphill battle just to reach its doors. The building itself was a masterpiece of protective design. Entrances were few in number, narrow, and easily secured by a handful of guards, creating a natural choke point against a hostile force. Where you might expect many windows, the lower levels presented mostly solid, unbreachable walls of stone. This design minimized vulnerable access points, turning the library into a literary citadel. For the most priceless collections, the protection was even more extreme. Entire rooms were designated as separate, fire-proof vaults. Constructed entirely from stone with heavy, sealed doors, these chambers acted as safes within the safe, ensuring that even if a fire breached the main hall, the core of human knowledge might still survive. The very fabric of the building was a shield against the ancient world's most common catastrophe. Builders relied on non-combustible materials like stone for the main structure and used ingenious vaulted ceilings made of fired brick and concrete, drastically reducing the fuel available for a blaze to consume. Some complexes took this foresight a step further, integrating water sources or large cisterns within their walls. While these provided for daily needs, their true purpose was as an emergency measure, a ready reserve to combat a sudden outbreak of flames. This layered approach to defense reveals a profound understanding. Preservation was not just a passive fight against slow decay from humidity or insects. It was an active, prepared stance against sudden, violent catastrophe. The architects understood that their greatest enemy was not just time, but chaos itself. They built to withstand both, creating a sanctuary so resilient that its core design would be replicated for centuries, even as the world outside its walls descended into turmoil. Deep within the library's protective shell, the relentless hum of the Scriptorium was the true sound of immortality. Rows of scribes, their hands stained with ink, bent over desks in a silent, coordinated dance of duplication. Each was creating a mirror image of a master scroll, their work transforming a single, vulnerable text into multiple, identical siblings. This was not merely transcription, it was the ancient world's most sophisticated backup system. Every new copy was an insurance policy against the inevitable disasters of fire, war, or the slow, silent decay of organic materials. The survival of an idea no longer rested on one fragile roll of papyrus in one specific building, but could now live on in another city, another library, hundreds of miles away. This multiplication of texts created a resilient, distributed network of knowledge, a web where the loss of one node did not mean the death of the information it held. To ensure these copies remained perfect over centuries, the process was governed by a strict, almost sacred, standardization. Scribes followed precise rules for the size and shape of their handwriting, the formulation of ink from soot and gum, and the consistent layout of text and margins on the page. This discipline was not about aesthetics alone. It was a crucial defense against the creeping decay of meaning. A poorly made copy with smudged ink or irregular lettering could become unreadable in just a few generations, rendering the entire preservation effort worthless. The most critical work, however, was performed by the head librarians themselves. They acted as scholarly editors, gathering multiple versions of a single text, perhaps a philosophical treatise by Plato or a medical text by Hippocrates, and comparing them line by line. Their goal was to identify and correct the accumulated errors, the misspellings, the omitted phrases, and the well-intentioned but inaccurate additions that inevitably crept in over decades of hand copying. This painstaking collation produced a definitive, error-checked master edition, a purified version that would then serve as the new source for all future scribes. This relentless, human-powered system of verification and replication was the ultimate bulwark against the entropy of words, a continuous process of error correction that fought to keep the original message intact across 1,000 years. It was this very system of creating and verifying perfect duplicates that allowed knowledge to break free from its stone vaults and travel, carried along the trade routes that connected the ancient world. The true strength of this ancient system lay not in any single fortress of knowledge, but in the invisible web that connected them. Libraries like those in Alexandria, Pergamum, and Rome were not isolated islands. They were dynamic nodes in a sprawling network of intellectual commerce. This was the ancient world's internet, a system where copies of precious texts, innovative cataloging methods, and even the scholars themselves were exchanged along established trade and diplomatic routes. This created a decentralized repository of human wisdom, a safety net woven across the entire Mediterranean. The tragic loss of one library, no matter how magnificent, did not have to mean the permanent loss of the works it had carefully shared with its peers. Diplomatic gifts were a powerful currency in this exchange. A ruler might send an entire collection of philosophical works to a neighboring kingdom as a gesture of goodwill, effectively planting a complete backup of that knowledge in a new, secure location. During periods of peace, systematic copying projects were undertaken, where scribes from one library would be granted access to another's holdings to duplicate its most important scrolls. This continuous flow of information across political and cultural boundaries meant that a text written in Greek in Egypt could find a safe harbor in a library in Asia Minor, and from there be copied once more for a collection in Rome. The collaborative spirit, though fiercely competitive at times, had a single, profound outcome. It ensured that the most vital works existed in multiple locations at once, vastly multiplying their chances of outlasting any local disaster. The design of these libraries, therefore, extended far beyond their physical walls of stone and cedar. It included a conceptual architecture for connection, a built-in capacity for exchange that proved its ultimate resilience when entire cities faced the torch. The greatest test of a library's design is not how it stands in times of peace, but how its knowledge endures in the face of utter catastrophe. The burning of the Library of Alexandria remains one of history's most haunting mysteries, a symbol of how a single flame can seemingly erase a millennium of human thought. Yet this event, for all its tragic grandeur, was not the absolute end it appears to be. The very principles we have traced created a system so resilient that the destruction of its most famous node could not erase its core content. Long before the fire, the relentless work of the Scriptorium had sent perfect copies sailing across the Mediterranean. Key texts from its collection had already found new homes in the great libraries of Pergamum, were being studied in the rising city of Constantinople, and would eventually be safeguarded within the stone walls of European monastic scriptoria. This distributed network was the ultimate safeguard. The loss of the building in Alexandria was a devastating cultural wound, a severing of a direct link to the original scholars and their master editions. But it was not a fatal blow to the knowledge itself. The core of classical learning survived this and countless other disasters in a fragmented, scattered, but stubbornly persistent form. The resilience was engineered directly into the system, a lesson written not in stone but in the very act of sharing copies across vast distances. This profound success, the ability of ideas to outlive their physical containers, meant that the torch of preservation was not extinguished. It was merely passed quietly and without fanfare to a new generation of custodians waiting in the shadows of a transformed world. The great network of libraries did not vanish with the Roman Empire, it simply retreated behind fortified walls. The flame of knowledge passed from the crumbling secular halls into the secluded scriptoria of medieval monasteries. Places like Monte Cassino in Italy or the remote island monasteries of Ireland became the new, unexpected bastions of learning, adapting the ancient principles of preservation to a world in chaos. Here, the library was no longer a public institution but was woven directly into the sacred architecture of the monastic complex. It was often housed in a dedicated room above the chapter house, or in a separate building nestled securely within the protective ring of the cloister. This was not just a change of location, it was a fundamental redesign of the entire preservation system. The thick stone walls of the monastery provided the same fire and pest resistance as the ancient libraries, but they also offered a new kind of defense, a spiritual and physical barrier against the relentless turmoil of the outside world. The monastic rule, a strict code governing every aspect of life, replaced the Pinax as the ultimate organizational system. It provided the disciplined, daily structure and, most importantly, the motivated, literate personnel. An army of monks sworn to poverty, chastity, and obedience now dedicated their lives to the sacred labor of copying. Their work ensured the survival of Scripture, but it also preserved the classical inheritance of Greece and Rome. A Benedictine monk might spend his morning meticulously copying the Psalms and his afternoon reproducing the geometry of Euclid or the philosophy of Aristotle, seeing both as facets of a single divine truth. This seamless transition from secular to religious custody was a masterstroke of cultural adaptation. The monastery was a self-sufficient community, an intellectual fortress capable of weathering famine, invasion, and political collapse. Its very purpose was endurance across generations. The architectural focus shifted decisively from grand, welcoming facades to absolute security and sanctity. Access was severely limited to the initiated, and the library itself was often the most secure room in the entire compound. This was not an end, but a metamorphosis. The ancient model, perfected over 1,000 years, was now cloistered in prayer, ensuring that the chain of knowledge remained unbroken for another millennium. How did these new guardians of knowledge physically protect the books they so painstakingly created? Their solution was to literally chain wisdom to the walls, creating a system of security so effective it would define libraries for centuries to come. The silent scriptorium was only one part of the library's heartbeat. Another rhythm pulsed through its halls, the sound of the human voice. For all the genius invested in protecting fragile scrolls, ancient architects understood that the most resilient storage medium of all was the human mind. This is the 14th principle, the deliberate design of architectural acoustics to serve the oral tradition. In the great libraries, reading was often a communal and vocal act. Specialized spaces like the exedri, those graceful semicircular recesses found in libraries like Ephesus, were not merely decorative niches. Their curved walls were carefully engineered to capture and project sound. A scholar or poet standing within this stone amphitheater could read aloud to a small group, their voice carried with remarkable clarity to every listener without the need to shout. This acoustic design transformed a simple reading into a powerful, shared experience. The practice of reading texts aloud served a critical preservation function beyond mere entertainment. In an age before printing, the act of hearing a text, of discussing its nuances immediately in a group, was a powerful mnemonic tool. It helped scholars internalize complex philosophical arguments, memorize vast passages of poetry, and grasp the precise rhythms of scientific prose. This created a living, mental archive, a backup copy of the text that existed not on papyrus, but in the collective memory of the community. If a fire consumed a scroll, its contents could potentially be reconstructed from the minds of those who had studied and recited it. The library's architecture thus championed a dual strategy. The written word was physically safeguarded in cedar cases and climate-controlled rooms, while the spoken word was given a dedicated space for oral dissemination. This blending of media created a far more robust system. A text was no longer a single, vulnerable object. It was a physical scroll, a series of identical copies in other libraries, and a living narrative held in the memories of people. This reminds us that these ancient institutions were not silent tombs for books, but vibrant social spaces for dynamic human interaction, where knowledge was continuously reinforced through both sight and sound. The very stones were shaped to help ideas echo through time. Beyond its protective walls and organized shelves, a library's greatest defense could be its own breathtaking beauty. The Library of Celsus did not simply house books, it presented them within a marble temple, its facade a cascade of columns, statues, and intricate carvings that proclaimed knowledge itself was divine. This was not mere decoration, it was a powerful, silent argument carved in stone. By designing a library to resemble a sacred space, architects and patrons were making a profound cultural statement. They were asserting that the ideas within were not just useful, but were the very foundation of their civilization's identity and its claim to greatness. This symbolic weight transformed the library from a functional archive into a public monument, an inseparable part of the city's soul. A citizen of Ephesus would look upon that magnificent structure and feel a surge of pride, a personal connection to the wisdom it guarded. This emotional investment was a potent form of preservation. A society that sees its library as a crown jewel, a symbol of its own enlightenment, will fight much harder to protect it from neglect or destruction. The sheer scale and artistry of the building argued for the perpetual value of its contents, compelling each new generation to become its guardian. This symbolic dimension ensured the library's longevity not just through physical strength, but through its unshakable place in the human heart. It became an enduring icon, and icons by their very nature demand to be preserved. This grand architecture of preservation rested on an equally formidable foundation of wealth. The gleaming marble of the Library of Celsus and the endless stacks of papyrus in Alexandria were not funded by goodwill alone. They were products of the ancient world's most powerful economic engines. Royal treasuries, filled with the taxes and tributes of entire empires, provided a river of gold that paid for everything. This money employed the master scribes whose hands never trembled. It purchased the endless rolls of expensive papyrus from the Nile, and it financed the teams of builders who maintained the stone walls against the relentless Mediterranean elements. Without this colossal, sustained investment, the entire system would have collapsed. The true genius, however, lay in making this financial support permanent. Visionary patrons established endowments, vast sums of capital whose investment returns created a perpetual income stream. This was the ultimate financial innovation for preservation. An endowment meant the library was no longer living hand to mouth, dependent on the whims of a current king or emperor. It could plan for the next century, not just the next fiscal year, funding the acquisition of new texts and the repair of old ones long after its original benefactor was gone. This careful financial architecture created a sustainable institution, a self-perpetuating entity that could withstand the rise and fall of individual rulers. It transformed the library from a pet project of a wealthy patron into a permanent civic asset. The economic design was a deliberate shield against the chaotic tides of history, ensuring that the mission of preservation would continue, funded and secure, generation after generation. This reveals a profound truth: the survival of knowledge for 2,000 years was not an accident. It was the result of a conscious, incredibly expensive, and brilliantly engineered investment in the human future. Yet for all the grandeur of marble and the security of stone, the true genius of these libraries was something you could not see: a hidden architecture of information. Within the seeming chaos of hundreds of thousands of scrolls, a powerful system of order was at work, one that began with the physical object itself. The scroll, the basic unit of knowledge, was gradually standardized. Preferred dimensions for different types of works emerged, along with consistent column widths for text and a universal system for tagging. That small hanging label, the syllabos, was more than a simple name tag. It was a key part of an information revolution. It meant a scholar could identify a scroll without ever unrolling it, preserving the fragile inner layers from unnecessary wear and tear. This physical uniformity was the first critical step toward taming the collection, making storage predictable, handling safer, and identification instant. But the true intellectual leap came from organizing the collection itself. The scholar Callimachus in Alexandria undertook a task of staggering ambition, creating the Pinax. This was not a simple list. It was the first known comprehensive library catalogue, a massive work that organized the entire sprawling collection by author and by literary genre. Think of it as the ancient world's first universal operating system for knowledge. It transformed the library from a warehouse of objects into a mapped universe of ideas. A scholar searching for a specific text on astronomy no longer had to wander through endless shelves hoping for a lucky find. The catalogue gave them a direct path. This standardization of cataloging created a common language that could be shared between libraries in Ephesus, Pergamum, and Rome. A scroll acquired by one library could be understood and integrated into the collection of another because they shared this fundamental organizational logic. This move toward universal formats and classifications was a deliberate war on chaos. It ensured that knowledge did not just survive physically, but remained perpetually findable, navigable, and usable for scholars across countless generations. This intellectual order, this design of the information itself, was the invisible fortress that kept the vast and growing mountain of scrolls from collapsing into meaningless rubble. How, then, did these libraries ensure that the precious information they so carefully organized was actually transmitted beyond their own walls? The Romans took the Greek model of the library and transformed it into an empire-wide institution, a network of knowledge so vast it stretched from the damp mists of Britain to the sun-baked cities of Syria. Their genius was not just in preservation, but in replication. In the heart of Rome, the Library of Ulpia stood as a landmark in Trajan's Forum, but its true legacy was as a blueprint. This blueprint was copied in city after city, making a grand public library as standard a feature of Roman urban planning as a forum, a bath complex, or an aqueduct. This was a deliberate act of cultural engineering, embedding the very idea of a library into the civic DNA of the Western world. These were not secluded academic enclaves like the Museum of Alexandria. They were vibrant, accessible public spaces, open to any literate citizen. This shift was profound. It transformed knowledge from a privilege of the elite into a pillar of civic life, a resource for lawyers, orators, and poets alike. The architecture itself broadcast this dual purpose of celebration and order. A key Roman innovation was the apse, a graceful semicircular recess that would typically house a statue of Minerva, the goddess of wisdom, or a revered author like Virgil or Cicero. This was not merely decorative, it was a visual anchor, a focal point that reminded every visitor of the intellectual tradition they were now entering. The walls flanking this central shrine were meticulously organized with rows of niches, the armaria, each one a designated home for a specific set of scrolls. This created a predictable, efficient, and beautiful system of storage that could be instantly understood by any Roman citizen, whether they were in Londinium or Damascus. Perhaps the most telling design feature was the common Roman practice of building dual libraries. A single complex would often contain two separate but adjacent halls, one dedicated to Greek texts and the other to Latin works. This architectural choice was a powerful statement. It acknowledged two parallel streams of literary tradition, preserving them side by side without one absorbing the other. It was a physical manifestation of respect for the Greek past coupled with a pride in the burgeoning Latin canon, ensuring that both would be copied, studied, and passed down together. By standardizing this model and planting it in every major city, the Romans did more than just build libraries, they built an unbreakable chain. When one link in the empire fell, the design and its precious contents were already thriving in a dozen other locations. This systematic dissemination created a resilient infrastructure for knowledge that would ultimately carry the legacy of the ancient world safely into the waiting hands of the Middle Ages. Light was a substance to be carefully measured within the library's walls. An architect would design windows and oculi, those perfect round openings in the ceiling, to act not as simple holes but as precision instruments for illumination. Their placement was a masterclass in indirect lighting. Sunlight would pour through these openings, but it never fell directly upon the precious scrolls resting in their niches. Instead, the beams were angled to splash across pale stone floors and light-colored walls, creating a soft, diffuse glow that filled the entire reading space. This reflected light was gentle enough to read by for hours, yet it shielded fragile inks from the bleaching power of direct sun and prevented parchment from becoming brittle under a constant assault of ultraviolet rays. This careful management continued after sunset. The flicker of oil lamps was a necessary risk, one mitigated by strict protocol. Lamps were likely kept few in number and positioned at a safe distance from the shelves, perhaps on central pillars or dedicated stands away from the scroll cabinets. This minimized two dangers at once: the ever-present threat of an open flame igniting dry papyrus, and the insidious, slow deposition of oily soot that could coat a scroll in a layer of grime, making it unreadable and chemically degrading the material over decades. This thoughtful dance with illumination reveals a holistic understanding of preservation. It was not enough to defend against fire and flood. They had to conquer the simple, daily need for light itself, turning a potential enemy into a carefully controlled ally. Every environmental factor, even the air itself, was part of the preservation equation, a system so complete it even accounted for the silent threat carried on the hands of every visitor. Sometimes the greatest protection for an idea was to hide it in plain sight. Deep within the grand public halls of a library, behind a nondescript door or at the end of a secluded corridor, lay the inner sanctum. This was not a space for the casual visitor. Access was a privilege granted only to the most trusted senior scholars, often requiring the personal permission of the head librarian himself. Within these restricted rooms, the library guarded its most volatile treasures, texts on subjects like alchemy, advanced statecraft, or revolutionary mathematics. These were ideas that could destabilize empires or fall into the wrong hands, and their preservation demanded more than just climate control. It demanded absolute secrecy. This architectural segregation was a deliberate preservation strategy. By limiting who could even see these texts, librarians drastically reduced the risks of theft, vandalism, or unauthorized copying. An imperfect copy of a controversial work made by an unqualified scribe could spread errors or dangerous misinterpretations across the world, corrupting the original knowledge beyond recovery. Furthermore, the most fragile and unique items, perhaps a singular manuscript written in an author's own hand, were shielded from the cumulative damage of constant handling. They rested in their secure cases, untouched for years, their integrity maintained for the one scholar whose genuine, critical need justified the risk of exposure. This practice of controlled access reveals a profound and pragmatic understanding that to save certain truths for the future, you sometimes had to bury them in the present, trusting that the right mind would find them when the world was finally ready. The torch of preservation did not flicker out with the fall of Rome. It was carried eastward into a brilliant new dawn. As the Islamic Golden Age blossomed, its great libraries, like the legendary House of Wisdom in Baghdad, became the new heirs to this ancient legacy. They did not merely imitate the classical model, they absorbed its core principles and then expanded them to a breathtaking scale. The systematic acquisition of texts became a global undertaking, with scholars actively seeking out knowledge from Greece, Persia, India, and beyond. This was not a passive collection, but an active, transformative process of translation into Arabic and later Persian, creating a new universal language of science and philosophy. The scriptoriums of Baghdad hummed with an energy that would have been familiar to an Alexandrian scribe, but now they were copying and verifying texts in a coordinated effort that spanned continents. The architectural genius evolved to suit a new environment. Grand courtyards with central water features were not just for beauty, they were sophisticated climate control systems. The evaporation from these pools naturally cooled and humidified the dry desert air, protecting the vast collections of parchment and paper from becoming brittle. This was the ancient principle of environmental engineering, refined for a new world. Crucially, the library remained a living heart, but now it beat within a complex that integrated madrasas for teaching and observatories for stargazing. This seamless fusion of library, school, and research institute was the ultimate expression of the library as an academic ecosystem. The scholars of the House of Wisdom and its sister institutions across the Islamic world were not just curators, they were innovators. They preserved the works of Aristotle and Euclid, but they also layered them with monumental new contributions in algebra, optics, and medicine. This vibrant chapter proves the ancient library model was not a rigid blueprint, but a living, adaptable system. It could cross cultural and linguistic boundaries, absorbing new ideas and flourishing under new patrons, ensuring that the chain of human knowledge grew stronger with every link. Silence was not an accident in these halls, but a crafted material as vital as stone. A scholar stepping into the great reading room of the Library of Celsus would have been immediately struck by a profound quiet, broken only by the soft rustle of papyrus or the distant echo of a sandal on marble. This was not merely the absence of noise, it was a presence, an overwhelming atmosphere of accumulated wisdom. The architecture itself enforced this reverence. Soaring ceilings made any human voice feel small, while the endless, orderly rows of scroll-filled niches stretched into the distance, a visual representation of centuries of human effort. You were not just in a room, you were standing inside a mind, a collective intellect so vast it demanded your humility. This psychological impact was a deliberate and brilliant design feature. The sheer scale and order of the space made a visitor instinctively slow their movements and lower their voice. It communicated, without a single word being spoken, that you were a temporary guardian of something far greater than yourself. This sense of responsibility was the final, crucial layer of preservation. A scholar handling a scroll in that environment did so with deliberate care, not just because the librarians required it, but because the space itself had taught them reverence. They could feel the weight of generations of thinkers who had stood in that very spot, unrolling the same text in search of truth. This transformed preservation from a set of rules into a shared cultural value. The hard protections of stone and cedar kept the scrolls safe from physical decay, but this soft power of psychological design safeguarded them from human carelessness. It ensured that every person who entered became a willing, conscientious participant in the library's ultimate mission, protecting the fragile thread of knowledge not just with their hands, but with their hearts and minds. This adaptability was the system's silent genius. The principles of preservation were universal, but their application was a masterclass in local problem solving. In the bone-dried deserts of Egypt, architects did not fight the climate, they embraced it. They built libraries with thick mud brick walls that absorbed the day's scorching heat, only to release it slowly during the cool nights, maintaining a remarkably stable temperature. Ventilation was minimized, not maximized, to keep the precious, desiccating air inside, allowing the natural aridity to protect papyrus scrolls from the mold that would devour them in a more humid land. Contrast this with a library in a humid coastal city like Ephesus. Here, the architectural priority flipped entirely. Builders designed intricate systems of air shafts and strategically placed windows to create constant cross breezes, actively pulling the damp, stagnant air out and replacing it with drier air from outside. They selected moisture-resistant stones and formulated special plasters that could absorb ambient humidity, turning the very walls into giant sponges. This was the same goal of climate control, achieved through opposite means. Then there is the breathtaking example of Petra. In that rose-red city, librarians did not construct a building at all, they sculpted one. The library was carved directly into the face of a towering sandstone cliff. The mountain itself became the library's shell, providing perfect, natural insulation from the desert's extreme temperature swings. The solid rock offered unparalleled stability against earthquakes and, of course, was utterly impervious to fire. The stone acted as a massive buffer, maintaining a cool, constant interior climate year-round, a perfect vault for knowledge. This brilliant localization proves a profound point. The library was not a rigid blueprint to be copied, but a fluid set of ideas to be adapted. Its success across 2,000 years and a dozen cultures hinged on this capacity to listen to the local environment and respond with ingenious, tailored solutions. The universal principles provided the compass, but each culture charted its own unique course to the same destination, the eternal safekeeping of human thought. The silent vow of the librarian was the library's true foundation. Within the hushed halls, these guardians operated under an unwritten code, a profound professional ethos that transcended the stone and cedar surrounding them. Their mission was not to judge the ideas they preserved, but to ensure their survival. This demanded an impartiality that seems almost radical today. A librarian in Alexandria would acquire a text espousing a political theory that directly challenged the ruling Ptolemies with the same meticulous care as a scroll praising their reign. The goal was completeness, a drive to gather every known text, to create a complete map of the human intellectual landscape, not just the parts that were comfortable or convenient. This was an active pursuit of diversity, a conscious effort to ensure that the library's shelves held not one story, but every story. The pursuit of accuracy was a sacred duty born from this same commitment. A librarian would spend weeks, even months, comparing multiple copies of a single philosophical treatise, hunting for scribble errors, a single misplaced word that could alter the entire meaning of an argument. Their corrections were not acts of censorship, but of reverence, a fight to return the text to its original, authentic state. This culture of intellectual honesty created a sanctuary for knowledge in its raw, unvarnished form. It ensured that future generations would not inherit a curated, sanitized version of history, but the full, messy, and magnificent record of human thought. The soul of the library was not in its grandest scroll, but in this unwavering commitment to truth over tribalism, a moral framework that guaranteed a rich and contradictory heritage could somehow slip through the narrow gates of time. The fragile papyrus scroll and the silent stream of digital code face the same ancient enemy, the relentless decay of information over time. Our modern world, with its vast server farms and cloud storage networks, is not abandoning the ancient library model, it is reinventing it. The principle of creating multiple copies and dispersing them across a network, which saved classical texts when Alexandria burned, is the very foundation of contemporary digital preservation. We no longer send scribes to duplicate scrolls by hand. We create exact digital replicas and store them in geographically separate data centers, ensuring that a catastrophe in one location cannot erase our collective memory. The fight against textual corruption has also found its digital parallel. Ancient librarians meticulously collated manuscripts to purge scribble errors, a process mirrored today by checksums and cryptographic hashing. These digital fingerprints allow archivists to detect the slightest corruption in a file, the modern equivalent of a single misplaced letter in a philosophical treatise, and automatically restore a pristine copy from the distributed network. Even the standardized physical scroll, with its consistent dimensions and syllabus tag, has its counterpart in our insistence on robust, open file formats and meticulous metadata. We understand that a file saved in a proprietary format is as vulnerable as a scroll written in a forgotten language, destined to become unreadable when the software that interprets it vanishes. This layered strategy, combining physical security for hardware, logical organization of data, and the vigilant work of human curators, is a direct inheritance from those halls of stone and cedar. The challenges may have evolved from fire and flood to bit rot and format obsolescence, but the core wisdom remains unchanged. True preservation is never a single solution, but a resilient, multi-layered system designed to outthink time itself. These ancient principles are not locked in the past. They are urgent instructions for our own precarious digital age. Our modern knowledge institutions, from national libraries to sprawling online archives, face a silent crisis of impermanence. The 26 design strategies that safeguarded scrolls for 2,000 years now offer a vital blueprint for preserving our collective digital memory. The need for redundant, geographically distributed backups has never been more critical. Just as multiple copies of a Greek play saved it from the fire in Alexandria, our most precious digital artifacts must exist in more than one cloud, on more than one continent. A single server failure or a regional disaster should not be able to erase a crucial piece of our cultural record. This demands a shift from convenience to resilience, building a global, decentralized network of knowledge that no single point of failure can destroy. Equally vital is the ancient lesson of sustainable funding. The grand libraries of Rome and Baghdad were not funded by fleeting grants or annual budgets. They were supported by endowments designed to last for centuries. Our modern archives and digital repositories must find similar long-term economic models, insulating themselves from the turbulent cycles of politics and short-term market interests. The survival of knowledge cannot be subject to the next election or quarterly report. Perhaps the most profound lesson is the ancient integration of the library with a living, breathing community. A library was not a warehouse, it was a workshop. Today, this means transforming our knowledge institutions from passive digital databases or silent reading rooms into vibrant, active public spaces. They must be places for collaboration, debate, and creation, where people don't just consume information, but use it to build new things. This constant, dynamic engagement, just like in the museum, renews the value of the collection every single day, creating a powerful constituency of citizens who will fight for its survival. Finally, the ancient holistic approach reminds us that preservation is a system, not a single action. It considers everything from the physical climate of a server farm to the invisible ethics of the algorithms that organize our digital world. It requires curators with the impartiality of the ancient librarians, committed to preserving a complete and contradictory record, not just a comfortable one. Building a knowledge system that lasts 2,000 years means thinking in layers, from the bedrock of sustainable funding to the pinnacle of an engaged public, all working in concert. The ultimate test of our own era will be whether we are as foresighted as those ancient builders, whether we choose to construct fortresses for our ideas that are as durable, as resilient, and as brilliantly human as the ones made of stone and cedar. These ancient libraries were not built in a decade but for a millennium. Their story is a profound lesson in long-term thinking, a masterclass in how to blend architecture, organization, and human dedication into a single, powerful engine for preservation. We have walked through their stone halls and seen how every element, from the specific choice of a non-combustible material to the unwritten ethos of the impartial librarian, conspired to protect the fragile flame of knowledge through centuries of upheaval and chaos. These institutions teach us a timeless truth that preservation is never a passive act of simply storing something away. It is an active, continuous, and multifaceted commitment. It is a fight against entropy waged on every front, from the chemical composition of ink to the political will of an emperor. As we now create our own vast digital archives and virtual libraries, we must carry forward this ancient wisdom. We are challenged to build our own systems with the same foresight and the same deep reverence for a future we will never see. The story of these libraries is, in its final analysis, a story of profound hope. It is a testament to humanity's most enduring desire to learn from the voices of the past and to build a legacy worthy of the generations yet to come. This legacy now rests in our hands. What single piece of knowledge from our own time, what creation or idea, do you believe is most vital to save for the people of the year 4024? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and if this journey through the fortresses of memory has resonated with you, subscribe for more explorations into the great mysteries of our shared past.